let's get started just with some sort of very general, how do we approach exams? Excuse me. There's a little bit going on here, and it's more just that you guys can see what's popping. But most of you will be starting exams probably in the next 3 to 4 weeks. Some of you a little bit earlier, obviously it depends on the school, but now is sort of the time that you guys need to be thinking about, how am I going to approach this exam session? So you should be studying at least about 2 to 3 weeks before your exams start. Now, this sort of applies for every subject, but obviously we're talking about maths right now. What it does mean is that we're not asking, or there is no expectation that you are sitting down for like 7 hours a day and studying until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Not at all. The expectation is that you start early with a little bit every single day. So you'll see here, I've said, try and study for an hour every day for maths. If you have access to past papers, or if you have access to like your textbook exercises, pick an exercise or pick a question and do that question on a day. So what I like to tell my students to do is, if you have a past paper, do a question a day sort of for the first week or so before you start, okay? The next thing I really recommend you guys do is have a study timetable. Obviously in grade 8, you have a lot of subjects that you need to fit into your exam time. And so it's really important to have some sort of structure as you start preparing for these exams. Now, some people, and just I've seen it pop up in the group, some people will be writing 2 exam papers for maths. Some people will only be writing 1, so that you sort of know where you're going. In matric, you do write 2 maths papers, and that will be for maths or maths lit. Doesn't really matter which one you decide to end up doing. Both maths and maths lit have 2 papers. Now, some of you will write 1, some of you will write 2. It really doesn't matter. The whole point is that you start studying early. Okay, I'll get to the timetable in a second now. What I really encourage everyone to do, if they don't have this information already, is find out from your teachers what it is you need to study. And this goes back to what I said about the practice questions. You will have, for the most part, the whole year's sort of content or work to start or to study for these exams. And so this is why it is so important that you start early, because you need to essentially fit a year's worth of work into 2 weeks. And so knowing what you need to study is very important. Now on that, this sort of very colorful table over here is basically directly out of the government's curriculum statement for grade 8 maths. Now, what it does is it lists all of the different topics that should be covered in grade 8. This might be a little bit different. COVID has changed things a little bit, so don't stress too much if there's stuff here that you haven't seen. Like I say, check with your teacher what you need to study so that you know what it is. But essentially, this is the work that we need to be prepared for our finals. Now, I've color-coded everything here according to the amount of time allocated to it. Now, you do not need to know how much time is spent on each section. That is not important. What is important is that, the sections that have a lot of time are the important sections. So you will see here that the sort of like light green sections are integers, exponents, algebraic expressions, geometry, and graphs. So all of these with 9 hours here, that's the most amount of time that we spent on those sections. What that means is these are important sections. And so this is a bit of a guide for you to decide, okay, these are very important sections that I need to focus on. The things that are like 3-4 hours, while still important, you do not necessarily have to spend as much time on. Okay, so if you want to, I'll leave this up for a second for you to take a screenshot. Like I say, don't stress too much about sections you haven't done. It is entirely possible that some of these sections will be left for grade 9. Often that happens, and that is absolutely fine. You then need to check with your teacher what it is you need to be studying, and you should hopefully already have that information. But this just gives you a bit of an idea of what sections you need to be focusing on for your exams. Alrighty. I'll give everyone a second if they do want to take a screenshot. Oof, my cats have got ants in their pants. Okay, so like I say, general idea for you to know what it is you need to be focused on. But if there's stuff that you know you haven't done, please don't stress. Okay. So the next thing that I would really encourage you guys to do, and I suppose it's very much dependent on who you are as a student, is to have some sort of study timetable. I would also recommend having an exam timetable for yourself, just so that you know what exams are coming up, say, in the first week of exams. And so you know, okay, I don't know, let's say you've got history in the first week and English in the first week, and you know, okay, I need to spend a bit more time on history or English or whatever it is. It's so that you can plan for whatever is coming up in your week of exams or whatever it is. Now, again, depends what type of person you are. I'm someone who likes to have very pretty looking timetables. If you are that type of person, if you literally just Google a study timetable, Google has all of these beautiful templates that you can literally just print out and use. Now, you need to decide what works for you. If you want to make your own study timetable, that's cool. I would recommend something like this first one over here with a little rainbow on it, so that A, you can see what you need to do for the week. B, you can put sort of times in here. So let's say, for example, Mondays you finish at 3 o'clock. You're going to start studying at 4 o'clock and you're going to spend 1 hour on maths, I don't know, for example. Okay. And so what it just does is it sets out your timetable for you as you go along. Like I said, I would also have like an assessment timetable. So writing down when all of your assessments are. I quite like to do this on a calendar sort of format. So like having the whole month printed out and then filling in where and what I have on. But literally, if you just Google exam templates, you will be able to find it. And I really do recommend you having some sort of record of when your papers are and when you are going to study for those papers. Okay, I just had a question of going back to this timetable. So there you go, just in case you need it. I'll give you a second if you want to take a screenshot.
This will be helpful, my people that are going to be good.
Okay, I'm going to hope that everyone has it. Right, now, just again, I've seen on the group here, you need to decide where and what you need to focus on. So the comment was, I only study hard for the subjects I don't particularly do well at. That's fair. If, for example, you know that Afrikaans is a subject that you know you will do well in, you don't need to stress too much about it. If you know that maths is something you need to spend more time on, that's okay. And so this is why I'm saying plan your life accordingly. Most of you still also have sport right up until exam start, which is very important for you to be doing. Having some sort of like physical activity to be doing while you're studying is very important. And so you need to make sure that if you know that your sport is going to end late one day, you don't really want to have to study that day. And so make sure that you have planned your life so that you can hopefully feel confident for your exams. Now on that, this point here, I feel is probably one of the most important points to take note of when studying. You need to give yourself breaks. When you are studying, you will do yourself a disservice by thinking that you need to sit and study for 4 hours straight. Firstly, our brains can't actually concentrate for that long. As a grade 8, you can probably focus for a maximum of, I would say, 30 to 40 minutes, like properly focus and properly absorb what you're doing, 30 to 40 minutes. So give yourself breaks as you go along. When I say breaks, that might be a 10-minute break to go and, I don't know, play soccer in the garden with your siblings. It might be a social media break. It might be a half an hour break to watch your favorite series, an episode of your favorite series. But make sure that you are giving yourself breaks. If you aren't, you're going to feel stressed and you're going to feel overwhelmed, and just giving yourself a little bit of why we do brain breaks. Giving yourself a brain break is so, so important. Okay. And the next thing specifically for maths, although a lot of like science and other sort of subjects, past papers are your best friends. Now, again, if you just Google grade 8 maths past papers, you will find a whole bunch. If you ask your teachers for past papers, they will be able to direct you in the right place. But actually doing a paper or doing papers before your exams is very, very important. Okay. What this does is it tells you what sort of questions you can expect. You can see how certain questions are asked, and just you can get an idea of what an assessment would look like. Okay, before I carry on, I can see Lolita has a question. Lolita, what's up?
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
I wanted to ask, how would you go about studying last minute? Like maybe the night before or the day before?
Okay, so I would definitely not recommend last minute studying, guys. What I can say is that if you have been diligent, so if you have been doing all of your homework that you've been given, coming to Watobe's lessons, you're probably already halfway there, okay? Because if you have been doing the work and if you have been doing your work consistently, your brain has absorbed that stuff. Yes, you might need a refresher, but if you have been working consistently, you should be okay. Now, in terms of last minute, I definitely do not recommend that. But if, I don't know, things go really badly and that's the only time you have, I would definitely recommend doing a paper. Because again, you will see how questions are asked, you will see what you can expect, but I really, really do not recommend last minute, guys. Okay. Yeah. Basically, my point is from this next week, start studying for your exams. Okay. I know this isn't your name and you can tell me and correct me. And I feel like I might remember, but you can correct me. Your name is Packard Bell on my screen here. Do you have a question?
Hello, ma'am. My name is Ashley, ma'am.
Yes. Yes. I knew it.
So, ma'am, I wanted to ask, ma'am, on the thingy, what you call this, ma'am, the test, ma'am, that the rest of the class wrote, ma'am. I did not get the test, ma'am. I got the link, but then when I went to the link, it was not showing me anything. I don't even know why.
Okay, I will follow up with that and see why that is the case. I will follow up. That's a bit weird. I'm sorry.
Yes, ma'am. And my name is with an IGH, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Welcome,
I don't know how to change that. Yolanda, do you know how to change the name?
I changed to Ashley.
Okay, so just Ashley spelled ASHLEIGH.
Yes, ma'am.
Great, thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you,
is ASHLE?
IGH.
Yes, ma'am.
IGH. Thank you.
I have a friend who is IEGH. Very confusing. Alrighty, guys. So yeah, basically the takeaway from this is from next week, I would start thinking about studying. Yes, Ingalihle, 3 weeks of studying sounds very daunting, but remember, I'm not saying study really hard for those first 2 weeks. I'm saying do an hour a day or do 2 hours a day. Because what it means is that you've been consistently reminding yourself of everything that it is that you need to be doing. Okay, so that's just like what you now need to start doing from, I would say, next week. Obviously, some of you are starting a bit earlier, so next week, really, I would start thinking about starting to get in an hour of studying each day. Right. In terms of actually, okay, we'll get to that in a second. In terms of actually how you should study, first things first is maths is a subject that is very much practice-based. So it's all very well having beautiful notes, and for some sections, notes are very helpful, but practice, excuse the pun, practice makes perfect. Okay, so you should know by this point how long your paper is going to be. Most grade 8 papers are about 2 hours long. Yours might be a bit shorter, yours might be a bit longer, but most of them is about 2 hours. So what I would do is when doing a practice paper, I would set a timer for myself. whether you use your kitchen timer or your cell phone or whatever. Obviously you don't have your cell phone with you, you put a timer and then you put your cell phone away. I would set a timer. Now, the reason I would set a timer when practicing past papers is because it helps you with your time management in papers. Often what happens is we get so stuck on like the first or the second question that we end up rushing the rest of the paper and making very silly mistakes. So if you know you have 2 hours and you've set your timer, when your timer goes off, you can then see, okay, I actually only completed, let's say, 70 of the 100 marks. I need to work a bit faster. Or, okay, cool, in 2 hours, I finished the whole paper and I had time to check I'm on the right track. So it is very important that you learn to time manage, so that in the exam, you don't feel rushed. Okay. Now, what I sort of generally say to my kids is that work on sort of this idea of a mark a minute. Now, what that means is if you're doing a question for 7 marks, it should take you about 7 minutes to do that question. So questions that are like 1 or 2 marks, you should be going through quick. It's the longer questions that take a bit longer, but those 1 or 2 mark questions should be done quickly. All right, so that is like time management. Ria Betsway, I do see your question. I'm not too sure where you would like me to go up to screenshot. If you could just let me know, I'm more than happy to go back up so that you can screenshot what you'd like to screenshot. The timetables, I'm assuming, or the, no, wait, I know what you mean. This one, okay. Right, so guys, time management, super important. We don't want to be writing our exam and then all of a sudden have 20 minutes left and have like 50 marks still to do. Time management, right? Now, what generally happens in your exam is that you get reading time, which I'll chat about in a second. But during your reading time, what I would do is I would say, okay, question 1, the whole of question 1 is worth, I don't know, 40 marks. I've got 40 minutes to do that. And you check your clock as you start writing to make sure that you're not going over the time. Obviously, if you spend maybe an extra 5 minutes, it's not the end of the world. But if you do, let's say, a 40-mark question that takes you an hour, you're going to be rushed for time. So a mark a minute, if you sort of keep that in the back of your head, hopefully your time management for your paper will be good. Right, when it actually comes to your exams and this is why I said I don't recommend last minute studying, is you need to go to bed early. And I'm not saying early like a baby, like 6 o'clock. Obviously, like what you would consider a normal bedtime for yourself. I know for you guys, it might be like 10 o'clock, whatever. My bedtime is 9 o'clock. That is when I need to go to bed. I know this. I don't function properly if I don't go to bed. So go to bed at a reasonable hour, whatever that means for you. Some people like to stay up later. Some people like to go to bed earlier, but do not spend the night before studying until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and then you have to write your exam at 8 o'clock. That then means you're maybe getting 4.5, 5 hours of sleep, and your brain is then tired. Whatever you would have studied is not going to have stuck properly in your brain. And so it just means that you've done yourself a disservice. Now you're going to be tired in the exam. You're not going to remember everything. You're going to feel stressed. There's no point. So go to bed at a reasonable time before your exams. Make sure that you eat breakfast. Again, you're probably going to be sitting for 2-ish hours writing your exam. You don't want to now feel hungry and have your stomach grumbling in your exam venue, and all you can now think about is a lovely breakfast when you can't have it. So make sure you have something to eat before you write your exam. Make sure you have your stationery packed the night before. A lot of schools say that you have to have your stationery in a clear like plastic bag. So make sure that you've got like a plastic sleeve or a Ziploc bag or whatever it is you're going to use where all your stationery is. Stationery, calculator, ruler, pencil, pen, eraser. If you're the type of person who likes highlighters, all of those things, make sure they are packed and ready so that you do not stress. In response to the question of why do they ask you to put it in a plastic bag, it's to prevent cheating. They can see exactly what it is you're bringing in, and they can see that you've got no notes with you. So that's why we often say you need to put it in a plastic packet or a see-through packet so that we can see what it is that you've brought in with you. Okay. And then try as far as possible. I know it isn't always easy. Your friends are there, you want to chat. Try as far as possible to avoid being around people the morning of your exam. Okay. Not because you don't like people, but just because often people talk about things and then you sort of misunderstand something or they misunderstand something and then everyone gets stressed before the exam. Find a quiet place before your exam. Take a moment, take a breath. If you are someone who prays before their exam or someone who likes to reflect before their exam, make sure you have a quiet space to do that so that you can go in feeling calm, focused, and confident for your exam. Okay, whether that means you go and, I don't know, sit quietly in the corner or sit under a tree and just have a quiet moment, that's really important because at the end of the day, you are the person writing the exam. You aren't writing the paper for your friends aren't writing the paper for you. You are the one writing the exam for you. And so you need to make sure that you are in the best space before writing that exam. And so if that means, sorry guys, you can chat about the exam, but I'm going to go have some quiet time, that's okay. Alrighty, so that is sort of morning of your exam. Make sure you are ready, you have your stationery, you have had a good night's sleep, and you've had some breakfast, and avoid people who are going to stress you out. Lost them. Right, when you are actually writing the exam, these are sort of my tips and tricks. Like I said, you need to decide what works for you. Before I move on, if you would like to take a screenshot, please do that. And I'm going to scroll down to the last little bit, and then we'll take a quick break because I know an hour and a half is very long to sit for. I can see Tato nodding at my hour and a half is long to sit for. Feel you. Alrighty. So in writing the exam, and we'll get there eventually, right? Excuse me. These are my things that I always say to my kids. So firstly, and this goes back to what I said earlier about reading time, generally in an exam, you get reading time. This is about 10 minutes before the start of your exam, where you're not allowed to write or highlight or anything like that, but you get to read through the paper. Now, this isn't a super important 10 minutes because what it does is it allows you to get an idea of what the paper is. And this is now going to go to my next point. As you're reading through the paper, make a note of, okay, question 1 is a question I know I'm confident in. That's the one I'm going to start with. Or I know that question 1 is where I'm going to get a lot of marks. Question 5, I don't really like that section. So I know that that's maybe a section I'm going to have to spend more time on than what I would expect to. And so reading your paper beforehand is super, super important. It gives you an idea of what you can expect. Okay, so on that, my advice is start every question on a new page. So when I say every question, I mean like the whole of question 1, the whole of question 2. The reason for this is because it means you can then answer the paper in any order you want. So let's say in your reading time, you decide question 1 is not for you, but question 2, you know that you can get all 40 of those marks or whatever the case is, or you can get 35 of the 40 marks. Start with question 2. You title your page question 2 and you do it. And what it means, because you've done every question on a separate piece of paper, at the end, you just put everything in order. So you put your question 2 and your question 3 and you put it all in order and you staple it and no one's any the wiser. It means that you can start where you are comfortable. And that is important because starting where you are comfortable means that A, you should be getting those marks. B, you're not wasting time on questions where you know you're feeling a bit unsure. And C, it just sets the tone for the paper. If you spend, let's say, the first half an hour of a paper feeling absolutely frazzled, the rest of the paper is not going to go well. If you spend the first half an hour of the paper doing the questions you know you are confident in, it just sets you up better for the exam. So I would start every single question on a new page so that you can start where you're comfortable, and then you just put it in order at the end. That's fine. And so what if at the end you didn't get to question 1? You've done the rest of the paper, right? So I would really, really recommend doing that when answering your questions. Another thing I really encourage you to do is make sure you have indicated or you have clearly shown where your answers are. Reasons for this is because not everyone works, like beautifully neatly, which is absolutely fine. But sometimes we've crossed things out and maybe we've got like a little arrow going up to the side because we needed more space. So indicate very clearly where your answers are. Now, hopefully you would have seen, I don't know if I do it all the time, but often what I do to indicate my answers, I put an arrow underneath it. Some people like to highlight their answers, doesn't really matter, but make sure your answer is indicated clearly. Because if you have got a paper that's a little bit messy and a little bit all over the place, at least your teacher knows where your answer is and sort of knows what it is that they're looking to find in the working out. Right, so on that, try as far as possible to write neatly. I know I'm skipping a couple points, but because I've made the point, write as neatly as you can. Obviously, not everyone has the neatest handwriting, that's fine. Just make sure we can read what it is you're saying. Try and leave a line between all of your questions. It's just for like ease of marking when we eventually mark your papers. If there is a line between each question's answer, then we just know that you've moved on from that question and we're not mixing up any of your working out. And so that's, for the most part, that's generally what you guys do anyways. Going back to if you decide to leave out questions, that's cool, but make sure you come back to them. So either mark them on your question paper, so like highlight it on your question paper or put a little star there so that you know to come back. And if you are going to leave out questions, make sure you've got space to answer them. If for whatever reason you've run out of space or you've half answered a question, but then you come back and you think, oh no, I wanted to add more. If you're going to write an answer in a different place, you really need to make sure that you have highlighted that. So what I generally say is panic. Let's say I've answered question, maybe I should get a pen. Let's say I've answered question 1.3.2. There's all my answers. And then I've gone to 1.3.3. And then I suddenly realized, oh, sure, but I actually wanted to write more here. And then at the end of the page, I write the rest of 1.3.2. That's fine. But put a big star there and maybe highlight it so that your teacher knows that there is more that they need to look for. Often what my kids do is I tell them, right there, where is it? So they'll say, rest of question 1.3.2 at the end of the paper. And then I know I just flip straight to the end of the paper and I know I have to look for that answer. Sometimes we don't see where you've put answers. And so we end up missing marks. So make sure that if you've written something out of order, you very, very clearly indicate that. Right, and finally, for the most part, schools don't really allow you to use typics during your exams. And even if they do, don't use typics. What ends up happening is you'll typic something out, and while you're waiting for it to dry, you forget that you're waiting for it to dry and you don't come back and you fill it in. And so then when your teacher's marking, there's just this beautiful typics situation and we don't actually know what's gone on there. So try not use typics, just cross it out. Like, I don't care if your entire page is crossed out. I would much rather you've crossed something out and then you've come back to it. With that being said, and obviously every school is different sort of in between grade 8 and grade 11, but just so that you know, in matric, if you, English, if you have crossed out an answer and then say, for example, forgotten to go back to it or whatever, they will actually come back and look at the stuff you've crossed out. And so crossing out is so much better than typics because I can still see what you've done and I can still give you some sort of feedback on what has been crossed out. Absolute chaos. But, you know, like we can still see what it is you were trying to do. Alrighty, so that is just my general recommendations for when you are writing your paper. That's what I would suggest you do. Okay, Tando, do you have a question?
Hello, ma'am. So, ma'am, my question is on when you said that, let's say there's a question that you don't know of, but then you still wrote a bit of it. Mm-hmm. And then like when it comes a time when like you remember what to write, but then you write it at like the end of the paper.
Mhm.
Okay. So ma'am, won't they isn't it like won't they like have a problem if you put it at the very end? Because like in most schools because in my school they have a problem if like you write it at the very end when it was supposed to be in the same order that they provided you that they provided the question with you in.
Tandor, they shouldn't have a problem with that. Because as long as you've marked that this question is answered at the end of the paper and you've numbered it correctly at the end, that's not a problem. And also because in matric, what they often do is they give you, so I'm thinking specifically of the second paper, often what you get is an answer booklet that gives you like a specific amount of space. And sometimes that space isn't enough. And so at the end of the booklet, they give you additional working space. So sometimes you end up writing stuff at the end in matric anyways, and they actually give you that space. So it isn't a problem, just clearly mark that you've written something later on.
Okay, ma'am.
Okay. Lolita?
Ma'am, before an exam, like during an exam, how do you calm yourself down?
So again, you need to find what works for you. I'm quite an anxious person and quite a stressed person myself. So I often feel quite panicked, especially if I have to do an assessment or if I know that I've got something important that I have to do. So often what I do is, it sounds silly, but count to 10 and just breathe deeply and count to 10. Sometimes it might be a case of, like I said earlier, just finding a quiet space before your exam and just like not having to deal with everyone, but find what works for you. Some people have like breathing exercises and they say like imagine a box and you breathe in and you go along the length and you breathe out and you go along the width. If you Google breathing exercises, you can find it. If you are someone who is spiritual, maybe like a prayer or like a reflection before you start. It might be a case of just closing your eyes for 10 seconds before you start and just blocking everyone out. And I know it's not always easy and you still might feel that anxiety, but just like taking a moment to calm your thoughts is very important.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Alrighty. Ayavuya, do you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I wanted to ask about using the TPEX thing. I wanted to say that other schools do allow using TPEX. It just depends on the teachers.
Yeah. So I completely agree. Some schools do allow it. I would still try avoid it if possible. And really then the only reason is sometimes we forget to go back and fill in what we've done. Obviously, if you're good about that, then by all means. But I know I often would use TPEX and then forget to go back. And so I just avoid it. But yeah, like you say, very much dependent on the school.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Sure. Ashley?
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask, ma'am, you see, let's say if that we're about that calming down thingy, ma'am, let's say if your friends wanna just be with you, then you can like it's noisy and like what do you do? And you can't calm yourself down.
So, I mean, like you need to remove yourself then from a situation that's causing you stress. And this might sound very silly. Maybe you just go sit in the bathroom for 5 minutes, lock yourself in the bathroom, take a second, have a breath, have a drink of water.
But ma'am, but the bathrooms when people do strange things in there, ma'am, like you see.
Or an empty classroom or something where you can just be away from people, or even just, find a teacher and be like, listen, I need some quiet space. Where can I go? And just remove yourself from them. Because if they're going to cause you stress, they're not doing you any good.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
All right. I don't know what your name is. You are 53940334 on my screen. If you let me know what your name is. Hi.
name is Sikuye.
Sikuye, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. So, ma'am, I wanted to ask, I agree we had the exam paper to try and figure out the things. If the ones that you didn't know, they said that you're going to be able to ask the questions here. So are you still going to tell us about the instructions first, and then
Yeah, so
we can ask the questions?
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm essentially going to do the questions that I think are really important, but if any point you have questions within the question, we'll deal with them as we go along.
Okay, ma'am, thank you.
Cool. Alrighty, guys, so then I muted myself. That's just like my general stuff for prepping for exams. You can take from it what you want. If you find some of it helpful, if you find all of it helpful, if you find none of it helpful, that's completely up to you. But these are the things that I have found not only help me, but also help the kids that I teach. All right, so I think I've spoken a little bit. So let's just take a 2-minute stretch break. Get up, touch your toes, touch your ears, stretch your bodies, and then let's actually get into looking at some of these questions.
I hope we are ready, everybody. Let's be ready for the question. Guys, I'm so excited. It's Bootcamp. It's different from our normal class. Naledi has volunteered for our first question. Naledi wants to give it a try. Naledi, are you aware that Teacher Sam is choosing?
No. Yolanda, your sound's gone a bit funny. Okay, guys, I'm hoping Yolanda's still with us. All right, so like I say, I kind of want to deal with the questions that
So the
okay, so is anyone else hearing some weird sounds going on, or is it just me? Okay. Cool. Get that it's network, guys. It's crazy. All right, so I'm just gonna go with it. I am going to try and do some of the questions that I think are very important. But like I say, if at any point you decide that there's questions you would like to deal with, you just need to, I'm going to ask you to put it on the chat, just because if I don't see, or rather I will see your hands, but if I see it on the chat, it'll pop up quickly and I can see that there's a question that you want to deal with.
But she's choosing questions that she knows that are important.
Okay, let's try. Okay, let's try. Right, so guys, if you have network problems, please don't stress. Remember, this is recorded and you guys will get the link to this recording, right? So if you are struggling, like, we get it, it happens to all of us. Don't stress, you will get the recording to this. All right, so all of you should have had these questions. The reason I've stopped here is just as a general thing. In your reading time, make sure you read the instructions to the paper, because often they will give you important information like how many decimal places you should round off to. Things like potentially answer each question on a new sheet of paper. So please make sure you read the instructions, just so that you're not making silly mistakes or doing something silly that you have actually been told what to do in the instructions. Okay, so I gave my instructions. These are pretty stock standard instructions. And we all hopefully have done all these questions and have marked. Now, I don't actually want to go through question 1, mostly because it's not something that in future, my screen's just not working. It's just not really a question that's super important or necessarily too tricky. However, if you had any problems with question 1 on the chat, quickly pop it there now. If there are lots of people with the same issue, then we can deal with it. Otherwise, I do want to go to the ones I think are important to deal with here. People with hands up, do we have questions? Tato, do you have a question?
I wanted to answer 1.1.
Okay, cool. So give me a second. Like I say, I'm going to do certain questions and then I'll ask for answers. Okay. Okay. Right. So everyone with a hand up, I'm not necessarily going to do question 1. It's more, it's quite a basic question. It's not something that I feel is exceptionally important. So I will ask for questions or answers when I get to the questions I want to do. Okay. Right. So a lot of people are saying that question 1.4 was a little bit difficult, and I would completely agree that that was quite a difficult question. Again, you are going to get a memo to this question. So if you did struggle with anything, please do go and have a look at the fully worked out memo. Just because a couple of people have said 1.4, let's very quickly chat about it. The question in 1.4 says, without the use of a calculator, so this is important, we essentially need to show all of our working out here. We want to determine the value of the first term if x is -1, y is +2, and z is 6. Now, guys, what's important is that we know what terms are. So remember, terms are separated by plus or minus signs. So there's term 1. This is the term we care about. And just quickly, we would have term 2, term 3, term 4, and term 5. So answering the first question, there are 5 terms. So we now want to take this term 1 and we want to find the value of term 1 by substituting in the values for x, y, and z. So term 1, I'm just going to write it down here, is 3x squared y minus 2z all over 3x. So now what I need to do is just use substitution to figure out its value. So every time I see an x, I'm going to replace it with a -1. So 3 times -1 squared. And then we've got an x in the denominator, so 3 times -1. Then we've got the y, so 3 times -1 squared times y, which is 2, minus 2z, and I told you that z was 6. So now you actually have to go and perform the mathematical operations. Again, it said without a calculator, so you need to show all of your working out. Remember, this situation that we have over here is telling me that I've got -1 multiplied twice. We know a negative times a negative is a positive, and 1 times 1 is 1. So what I actually have there is 3 times +1 times 2, which gives me 6. When I go and multiply the -2 and the 6, I get a -12 all over 3 times -1, which is a -3. And now I start to simplify. So let's just carry on up here. 6 minus 12 gives me a -6 over a -3. A negative divided by a negative is a positive, and 6 divided by 3 is 2. And so my answer there is 2. Again, just quickly what I was saying earlier, This is how I usually indicate my answers with an arrow. Some people like to go the extra step and also highlight their answers. It really doesn't matter. Just make sure I can very clearly see where your answer is. Right, so that was for 1.4. Hopefully we're okay with that now. It is substitution. I suppose the tricky bit here was because I said without a calculator. So you had to show all of your steps. As a sort of general thing, this was 4 marks. So I shouldn't be spending longer than 4 to 5 minutes on this sort of question. Okay. Right, question 2, there were a couple I wanted to do. So 2.1.3, 0.4, 0.5, 0.6 I wanted to do with you. I'm hoping that 2.1.1 and 2.1.2 we were all okay with. Okay, Ashley, do you have a question? Okay, Lolita, do you have a question?
Yes, ma'am. I have 2 questions. Okay. Well, the first one, can you please scroll up so I can screenshot?
Sorry.
And I don't really understand how we got -1 and 2.
So I gave you the values of X, Y, and Z.
Oh, okay, ma'am.
I just substituted in.
Oh, okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Pleasure. Sorry, guys, I did move on a bit quickly from that. So please do take a screenshot if you need. Like I say, you will get a full worked out memo. So if you do miss it, don't stress too much. You will get the answers. Alrighty, so I'm going to then go to 2.1.3 because this is where I think things started getting a little bit trickier. Now, this question, question 2, is dealing with algebra. Some people love algebra, some people hate algebra. It really is very much a love-hate relationship, which I understand, right? Algebra is sometimes a bit of a pain, but we need to be able to do it. Algebra is a very important section in math. It comes up pretty much in every single topic in mathematics, so we need to be comfortable with it. So when needing to simplify, and that's an important point to make, this question, or this instruction rather, says simplify. I want to make it look nicer, essentially. Simplification often deals with multiplication and division. In this case, I have been given 4 times the bracket x plus 2. So I need to go and multiply or distribute the 4 to both terms in the bracket. Now, if you go back onto Watobe's website and you go back and have a look at our algebra videos, I said if you aren't comfortable with algebra, you can set up like a little side working out sheet, or even just have like a rough sheet of paper for yourself and do your multiplication there. So the first multiplication was 4 times x, we're looking x, and my second multiplication was 4 times positive 2. And then you can do it step by step. So 4 times x we know is 4x, and 4 times positive 2 is then a positive 8. And then you have the 2 terms that you're working with. And so we know that 4 times x plus 2 is 4x plus 8. And we have simplified our expression. Okay, so when you have brackets and when you are simplifying, you need to multiply the coefficient or the value in front of the bracket into the brackets. Right. So hopefully we're all sort of okay with 2.1.3. 2.1.4, a little bit trickier because now I've got 2 terms that I need to simplify. Now, I'll give you a second to screenshot that, and then we'll have a look at the next one. Okay, so guys, in 2.1.4, what we need to be mindful of is the fact that I actually have 2 terms here. Remember that minus sign in the middle separates my terms. And remember, the second I've got multiple terms, when I want to simplify, I want to deal with each one individually. Okay, I can see Oratilia has a hand up. So before I carry on, Oratilia, what is your question?
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask on the question above 2.9.4, ma'am. Where did we get, how did you get the 8, ma'am?
So remember that 8 came from me saying 4 times 2. So distributing the 4 to the 2 in the bracket.
Oh, thank you, ma'am.
Sure. Alrighty, guys. So if we go and have a look then at 2.1.4, I've got 2 terms there. So what I want to do is I want to simplify each term. Again, if you need to have a little multiplication section for yourself, go for it. I'm going to do this just in different colors because I can, but let's have a look-see. So in my first term, I want to multiply the 3 to the 2c, and I want to multiply the 3 to the positive 3. So if I look at that sort of in my multiplication block, I've got 3 multiplied by positive 2c, and I've got 3 multiplied by 3. Now we know that 3 times 2c is 6c, and 3 times 3 is 9. So when I go and that's weird, so sorry. When I go and multiply out my first term, this is the answer that I get. So I have got 6c plus 9, and that comes straight from multiplying out my first term. Now I essentially want to do the same thing with the second term. Now the second term, I have got negative 5 times 1 and negative 5 times 4c. So if I've got my little multiplication block, a negative 5 times a positive 1 and a negative 5 times a positive 4c. Now, can someone quickly tell me, put it in the chat for me, what is a negative times a negative? What sign do I get? Good, guys, well done. So if I had a negative times a negative, I would get a positive. In both of these cases, however, I have got a negative times a positive. So now my question is, what is a negative times a positive? What sign do I get? Well done, guys. Awesome. Matthew, do you want to tell me?
Hello, ma'am.
Hi. Do you have a question?
No, ma'am. Answer the question.
Yes, tell me.
A negative times a positive would still be a negative.
Excellent. Well done. So guys, a negative times a positive is still a negative. So that means when I times the negative 5 and the positive 1, I get negative 5. And when I times negative 4 times, when I times negative 5 times 4c, I get negative 20c. Now, guys, remember in the instructions for this question, I didn't say you couldn't use a calculator. So if you need to, do these multiplications on your calculator and double check yourself. Right, but what that means is I now have my negative 5 minus 20c, and that came from multiplying out my second term. Now what I essentially have, and I'm going to write this without the colors, just so that we're not confusing ourselves. I have got 6c plus 9 minus 5 minus 20c. We now go and have a look for like terms. Now remember, like terms are terms that have the same variable and same exponent. So in this term, in this expression rather, I've got a negative, guys, my brain has stopped. I'm going to start my sentence again. We look for like terms. My like terms here are 6c and negative 20c, because both of those have c's in them. And then the constants are like terms is 9 and negative 5. So those are the like terms that I need to go and add together. So Bonolo, do you want to tell me what my final answer would be here? Or do you have a question? Bonolo? Okay, no problem. Right. So we add up our like terms. No problem. 6c minus 20c. Again, if you're not feeling comfortable, put it on your calculator. 6 minus 20, what do you get? If you're comfortable with working with integers, then hopefully this will be a little bit easier. But 6c minus 20c is then negative 14c. So those of you who earlier on in the chat were telling me negative 14c, well done. That was sort of your final answer that you needed to get. And then a little bit easier, 9 minus 5 is then a plus 4. And so we've simplified our expression to negative 14c plus 4. Now I know that this is fully simplified because I don't have any more like terms here. Negative 14c and 4 are not like terms. And so I can't add them together, so I can't do anything else with them. Alrighty. Oops, sorry, I get too excited. If you need, take a screenshot. And let's have a look at the next one. Tankosi, while everyone's taking a screenshot, do you have a question?
Hello, ma'am.
Hi.
Ma'am, I think there's a mistake here on the answer sheets. The answer sheet, it says 14c plus 4, but you wrote negative 14.
Yeah, no, it should say negative 14c. I will double check that. There might have been a mistake in the copying of it. I'll double check. Thank you.
All right, ma'am. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Okay, cool. So let's have a look at 2.1.5. 2.1.5 is tricky because I haven't written fractions as I usually would. I've put in a division sign. And this is now again where knowing what terms you have is so important. So if we separate this up into terms, here's term 1. The plus sign separates it from term 2, which is the 12a divided by 3. And this separates it from term 3, which is the 2a times negative 4. Remember, plus and minus signs separate terms, and we don't stress about plus or minus signs inside a bracket. It is inside a bracket. It's telling me that that is what I'm multiplying with the 2a. So I have got 3 terms here that I need to work with. Orotile, do you have a question?
Ma'am, why is it only the plus and the minus sign that separates the terms?
So plus and minus signs separate terms. I suppose it sort of goes back to the concept of like terms. I can simplify a singular term through multiplication and division, but between terms, I can then start to add and subtract. So for example, let's say I had 2a over 2. That's still one term because I can simplify that still within itself. But the second I have 2a plus, I don't know, 4, these are 2 separate sort of values that I'm now speaking about. And so they don't relate as closely to each other as a division or a multiplication.
Thank you, ma'am.
Alrighty. Good question, though. I feel like I need to maybe try find a better explanation on my part. Okay, so guys, our terms. I'm going to rewrite this with a fraction because that might be a little bit easier. If you don't want to, you don't have to. So 6a plus 12a divided by 3. And now again, we need to be careful. We've got a positive times a negative. So just bear it in mind that that is something I'm going to have to take note of when I do the multiplication. Right, in my first term, as I sort of said now, I can't simplify 6a any further. It's 6a. But in my second term, I can simplify 12a over 3 because I know that I can simplify 12 divided by 3. That's what that's saying to me. And I know that 12 divided by 3 is 4. And then I still have my a. So Bolela, exactly 4a. Finally, in my last term, I have got the 2a times the negative 4. Now we know a negative times a positive is a negative. We know that 2 times 4 is then negative 8. And then we still have the a. So remember, if you were with us for our algebra section, there was a little SNV reminder to us. Start with your signs. So positive times a negative is a negative. Then deal with your numbers. In this case, 2 times 4 is 8. And then if you have any variables, you can deal with them. So in this case, I still had the A that I needed to add there. So that's just like a little reminder for yourself when you are multiplying or dividing. So this works for multiplication or division, to double check everything as you go along. If I just rewrite this without all the colors, I've got 6a plus 4a minus 8a. Now, can someone tell me, are these all like terms? You can just put a yes or no on the chat. Are these all like terms? And remember, like terms, they have the same variable and exponent. Awakiwe, do you want to tell me? Okay, no problem.
Yeah, ma'am, they're like terms.
Good, well done. So do you want to tell me what 6a plus 4a minus 8a is? What would it simplify to?
Isn't it 2a?
Good, well done. Right, guys, so these are all like terms. So if you're the person who likes to highlight their like terms, these would all be highlighted in exactly the same color because they're all like terms. 6a plus 4a is 10a. 10a minus 8a, whoopsie daisies, is then a positive 2a. And I've simplified my expression. Well done. I saw that come through on the chat as well. Very nicely done. Right, so take a screenshot if you would like it. Whoops, sorry, panic. And then let's move on to our next one. Alrighty. So 2.1.6, I wanted to talk about because what is challenging in this one is the fact that I've got 3 terms and the middle term is quite a tricky one. So my 3 terms, just in case we're not 100% sure, there's term 1, term 2, and then term 3. So term 1 and term 3, I can't do anything with to start off with. It's negative 2xy or negative 2yx and 24. Can't do much with that. It's the middle term that is a bit iffy. Now, the middle term is a bit iffy because I have got a negative 4 and an x that needs to multiply into this bracket. Now, however you choose to do this is up to you. If you want to multiply the negative 4 in first and then the x, or the x in first and then the negative 4, it's really up to you. But one of the ways we can actually sort of do it all in one go is to put the x and the negative 4 together and then multiply it in. The reason we can do this is because the order in which you multiply things doesn't matter. Whether I say 2 times 4 or 4 times 2, I still get 8. So it doesn't matter what order I multiply things in, I will get the same answer. So for the first term, if you wanted to, the only thing we would really do here is maybe put it in alphabetical order. So write it as xy rather than yx. Again, because order of multiplication doesn't matter, x times y and y times x mean exactly the same thing. Now for my second term, I am going to write this as a negative 4x. Because negative 4 times x is negative 4x, and that is what I will multiply into my bracket. It just means that I am able to do the 2 multiplications at the same time. And so now what that means is I can see very clearly that I have to multiply negative 4x with 6 and negative 4x with negative 2y. Now, again, if you need your multiplication block, by all means do it. Whoops. I have a negative 4x times a positive 6 and a negative 4x times a negative 2y. I've just put it in brackets because of that negative. You don't have to. This is just rough working out. So a negative times a positive we already know is a negative. Remember SNV. So there's my signs dealt with. My numbers, 4 times 6 is 24. And I just have this x variable, so it would be negative 24x. My second multiplication, we know a negative times a negative is now a positive. So that's my signs dealt with. 4 times 2 is then 8. And we know that x times y is just xy. And so now I've multiplied out this middle term. So I know I've got a negative 24x plus 8xy when I go and do the distribution. I obviously still have the negative 2xy and the plus 24, but through multiplying in my negative 4x, I've gotten rid of the bracket, and that's the whole point of simplification. Right, so just without the colors, just so that we can see a bit clearer, I've got negative 2xy minus 24x plus 8xy, whoops, plus 24. Now I go and look for like terms. So maybe hands up, who can tell me what like terms I have here? Or do I have any like terms? Riobetswe, tell me.
Hi, ma'am.
Hi.
So, ma'am, your like terms are negative 2xy and 8xy.
Excellent. Are those the only like terms I have?
Yes, ma'am.
Good, well done. So guys, the only like terms I actually have are the xy terms. The negative 24 only has an x, and then the 24 at the end is a constant. I can't really do anything with that. So that's it. Now I add my like terms together. Negative 2xy plus 8xy is 6xy. And because I can't do anything with the other two, I just write them down. They're still part of my expression. It's not like I just all of a sudden ignore them because they don't have any like terms. But they don't change from the step before. Right, and that's your answer there. Riobetswe, do you still have a question? No? Okay.
No, ma'am.
Right, so if you need, take a screenshot. Right, so guys, that is sort of algebra, and just because time is running away from us, I just quickly want to chat about some equations, just because I know equations sometimes scare us a little bit. So I've jumped to 3.2, mostly just so that we can chat about all of the important things that we need to chat about. An hour and a half goes so quickly, my gracious. Tando, whoops.
Ma'am. So ma'am, when you got into the topic of equations, I wanted to know in a question, so like on the left hand side it's minus, whereas on the right hand side it's addition. I wanted to know between the two signs, which one must we use?
I don't know if I really understand your question. Can you give it to me in an example?
Okay, so like 3.3 here, ma'am.
Okay, yeah.
So you can see that on the left hand side it's 3 minus x.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the right hand side it's 4x plus 18. So I wanted to know in a question, which sign should we use to like distribute them, because like we have to like use the same exact sign that we use on the left and on the right.
Okay, so in a question like 3.3, and we'll start here soon as you've asked the question, what I first consider is the fact that I'm solving for x. So I want to get x on one side only. Now I can see, as you've pointed out, I have an X both on the left and the right, and that's a problem for me. So I want to put them all on one side. Now, my go-to is to always put the X's on the left, just because answers when we write them down is generally X equals, and so X is generally on the left. So what I want to do is I sort of want to ask myself, how do I take this positive 4X and move it over my equal sign? And this is now where we use inverse operations. Oh, come on. And so this inverse operation, because this was initially a plus 4x, I would subtract 4x on both sides of my equation because I need to keep it balanced. And what it does is it essentially cancels out the x's on the left, but it brings the x over onto, cancels the x's on the right and brings the x over onto the left. So I would have a situation of 3 minus x minus 4x is equal to, and because I subtracted the 4x here, I just have an 18 now on the right-hand side. I still then have an issue with the positive 3. I want to get that to join its other constant on the right. And so again, using my like terms, I am going to now subtract 3 on both sides, because that will then eliminate the 3 on the left-hand side. And so now what I have is all of my x's on the left and all of my constants on the right.
Okay, ma'am. So what got you to thinking you must use the minus sign instead of the plus sign?
So for example, for the negative 4x.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so the reason I use the opposite of what it was is because I essentially want to get rid of it on one side. Now, if I have, let's say, 4 Smarties, if I want to get rid of those 4 Smarties, I need to take away 4 Smarties. So I need to do the opposite operation of what it originally was, and that will get rid of my term. But because I have to do it on both sides of the equation, yes, I've gotten rid of it on the right-hand side, but I brought it back on the left-hand side just with the opposite side sign. And this is what essentially inverse operations is. It's keeping your equation balanced by doing the same thing on either side.
Oh, okay, ma'am.
Okay, good, well done.
That makes more sense.
Good. Alrighty, guys. So if we just finish this off, we've now got like terms on either side. So this would be a negative 5x, and we know that 18 minus 3 is 15. Can someone either put it in the chat or raise their hand? How do I finish solving this equation? What is my next step? Lolita, tell me.
So to cancel out the negative 5x, you'd have to divide it by 5x.
A positive 5x or a negative 5x?
Positive 5x? Negative 5.
Because remember, I only want x alone. So I want to get rid of the negative as well.
And then you'd get x.
Mm-hmm.
Then you'd divide 15 by 5, which is 3.
Okay.
So x equals 3.
Alrighty, guys. So exactly. First things first, if you do something on one side, as I've just said, you have to do it on the other side. So as Lolita just said, if I'm going to divide one side by something, I have to divide the other side by something. Now, because I've divided the left-hand side by negative 5, I need to divide the right-hand side by negative 5. So I'm just going to go up here. I would have negative 5x divided by negative 5 because I want both the negative and the 5 gone. But that then means on the right-hand side, I need to divide 15 by negative 5 as well. And it's divided by the same thing. And so x is equal to a negative 3. And guys, remember, you check yourself if you are unsure by taking this value for x that you have just found and substituting it back into your equation and checking that the left is equal to the right. If they are equal, you have found the correct value for x. Okay. If you need to take a screenshot, please by all means do so. right? And then I just want to have a look at 3.4 here, because this is dealing with a fraction, and sometimes fractions scare us. And I completely understand why, but they don't need to scare us. Right, so in an example like this, what I sometimes like to do with my equations is I like to highlight where the x is, because what I know is that at the end of the day, I want that x alone. My goal is to get x by itself, i.e. solve for x. So I can see that I've got a couple things I need to deal with here. I'm not so keen on this -6. I'm not so keen on this division by 4, and I'm not so keen on this multiplication by 3. Now, the reason I'm pointing out all of these operations is because, as I said earlier, to solve an equation, we have to use inverse operations. And so knowing what the operations are to start with is going to help us to do that. Now, I always say try and start with the thing furthest away from x. Now, it doesn't really always make a whole lot of sense. But basically what I mean is if you've got something being added or subtracted to the term with x in it, start with that thing. Now, this is was originally a -6. And so we know if we essentially want to move it over the equal sign, I would have to do the inverse of what it originally was, or the opposite of what it originally was, and add 6 on both sides. Because -6 plus 6, that goes away. And so what I now have is just the fraction that has the x in it. And I can start to move closer and closer to getting my answer for x. The next thing is when I have fractions, the first thing I want to get rid of is the denominator. Now we know a denominator implies division. The opposite of division we know is multiplication. That will get rid of my denominator, but remember, what I do on one side, I need to do on both sides. And so what I have here is 3x is equal to 6 times 4, which is 24. And then finally, as we've seen in the last one, if I have this coefficient, or if I have a number in front of x, I can get rid of it by dividing both sides by the coefficient. 3 divided by 3 is 1. So I've just got x left over. And so what I have is x is equal to 24 divided by 3, which is 8. And so in this case, x is equal to 8. Right, so inverse operations or opposite operations is very, very important when solving equations. And that's sort of what I need you to take away from that. Now, just because I saw Manenke's sort of comment there, even if you just know the answer, put it down. If you cannot for the life of you figure out the working out, at least you've got 1 mark for the answer. That's better than no marks. Okay. Right, take your screenshot if you need. Excuse me. Right, I know we've got 5 minutes, but I would just quickly like to chat about the geometry questions that I had given you, which I'm pretty sure are in question 4, if I remember my whole paper correctly. Oh, come on. Sorry, and I'll just have to fight with my screen. It knows we actually want to do work, so now it's going to fight with me. Okay, whoops. So question 4 was a geometry question. Now, geometry, whether we like it or not, is a very, very, very important section. And again, it's like algebra. Some people love it, some people hate it, and that's fine. You don't have to like every single section in maths, but what we need to be able to do is try our best to answer these questions. Now, what you need to remember is that there are all of these reasons that you need to give when doing geometry. And so you need to make sure that you give those reasons. If you don't give reasons, guys, you're going to lose marks, right? unfortunately just as simple as that. Now, these first couple shouldn't have been too tricky to deal with. Where things started getting a bit trickier was, say, from about 4.3, 4.4. So the first one, just so that we're all clear, you could have used vert-op angles to work out x, because x plus 83 and 110 are the same. And you could have then used angles on a straight line to go and work out y. You could have done it that way. You could have done it that way. There's many different ways to do it. But the first two shouldn't have been tricky. From 4.3, things got a little bit more complicated. What we see, though, is that these two angles are vertically opposite. And we know that vertically opposite angles are equal. So we can set up an equation to go and then therefore solve for x. Now, remember, I've made a statement here, so I have to give a reason. Vert-op angles are equal. This is now basically what we have just spoken about, solving an equation. So I'm going to subtract 2x on both sides, and I'm going to add 10 on both sides. Now, the reason I've done this is I've subtracted 2x to bring the 2x over, and I've added 10 to bring the 10 over. I've used the opposite operation for both of those terms in order to get them to the other side of the equation. And now this is an equation you know how to solve. 2x is equal to 20, and so therefore x is equal to 10 degrees. Right, so again, please make sure when doing geometry questions, you are giving reasons for your answers. Whoops. Take a quick screenshot if you want.
Yeah, my people did really well. You guys did really, really well.
Right, so guys, an hour and a half really is flown by. I completely understand that there might still be questions, and Yolanda, maybe you can help me here. There is the WhatsApp line available for them to answer questions, ask questions. Am I correct?
I'm not aware of that part of the WhatsApp line.
Yeah, no, I could be making things up in my head. It happens a lot. Right, guys. So what I would encourage you to do is when you get the worked out memo, so when you get all of the steps, you go through it carefully and you make sure that if you have any questions, you take it to school with you to ask those questions. But please also bear in mind that we are going to do revision in, I think it's in 3 weeks' time of stuff. So what I might do is, because you guys have this resource and because we haven't been able to go through it all, is I might just actually in that last week carry on with this paper, because all of you will have it. Those people who didn't join the bootcamp can now see some extra questions. And because this is based on everything from the year, it'll still be a really good revision. So please don't get rid of these questions. We'll chat about them more. I will make time in that revision session for us to go through more of these questions. And like I say, please by all means take this to your teachers and ask for help if you have any questions, but you will get a full memo. So hopefully that will also help a little bit. You guys were absolutely amazing. Like,